everyone, how's it going? Today we're gonna play a hybrid HB deck versus Smoke. I call this a hybrid HB because as you can see, I have Breakaway Grid with Eve and Adonis campaigns, but one of my win conditions is scoring via Biotic Labor. Now, there's a very specific win which you play against Smoke. You want to deny the Temujin contracts because that's how they get their early start. So I played 2 advanced assembly lines on my first turn instead of icing centrals like you used to, and forcing my opponent to blindly toss down the Temujin contracts, which I then defend with an advanced assembly lines usage. So I think this is still one of the strongest counters to a turn 1 Temujin contracts. You can't always guarantee you get 3 ice centrals, but advanced assembly lines helps you defend from a turn 1 Temujin. So this really slows down my opponent. They got 1 Temujin tick off, essentially recuperating their investment in the Temujin. But that's it. The whole R&D is sealed because now Architect's on it, and I've put another ice on it thanks to Architect. I also managed to I managed to regenerate my advanced assembly lines because my opponent triggered the second subroutine of Architect. So now I'm filthy rich. I get to install 1 item with the Architect with one of my old assembly lines there, and that's a Jackson Howard. So I want a Jackson Howard protected by an end-around piece of ice. That's the next priority. After stopping the economy, I want to speed up ahead with card draw. Card draw is actually very important to this deck because you need to find the agendas to score, and I'm making a mistake here by not scoring my agenda. Yeah, I shouldn't be pitching the Vitruvius here. I should be pitching other cards. You notice I'm pitching the Z 2.0. This is the card I'm experimenting with this deck. The intention, as you might have guessed, since this is a Batty deck that I mentioned earlier, is to fire Marcus Batty on Z 2.0 because now we actually get a proper Trash 1 hardware subroutine. That combos very well with Z 2.0 to allow you to trash some nasty consoles. Yep, I'm thinking of Cipher right here. With Cipher so prevalent in the meta, I think this seems to be a very good shout. So I'm actually playtesting this. 1 Z 2.0 with 2 Marcus Battys in my deck. Obviously, I trashed the Z 2.0 in the bin. It's too expensive for what it does, and my opponent doesn't really care about hardware. The most hardware they'll get up, it seems to be an Astrolabe. Until R&Dis hit the table, I don't think I need Z 2.0s. And anyway, Smoke has a very easy time with Z 2.0s. They are no more taxing than it itchy, so I'm not bothering with them. So that's actually quite a big strike against Z 2.0 right there. The fact that it is kind of useless in some matchups. Well, we'll move on. Let's see what my opponent tries to do. Now, I'm actually able to get the Eve campaigns going. I finally find an Eve campaign after opening with a Breakaway Grid but no campaigns. My opponent tries to suppress my campaigns with a Scrubber, which is not too bad, except that I have more coming on the way. With their economy so stuffed, there's no way my opponent can contest this. And oh man, that Jackson draws me into friends. This is the power of card advantage. With the Jackson and the secure remote, I'm able to get 2 card draw per click instead of 1. This allows me to find the pieces I need all that much quicker. The problem is, I'm not actually winning. I'm not drawing the ice I need to win. I could attempt to score behind the Lotus Field there, but that's a problem. I can't, because my opponent has his SMC out. So here's what they do. My opponent clearly sees that this Jackson is causing a problem, and so they get to the base of the server, and I use the Jackson very mistakenly because, yeah, that was a mistake. Nope, it wasn't. Even though my opponent was on 1 credit, they had 2 more credits from the Scrubber, so I needed to clear the Jackson since there were agendas in the bin. Now, I did keep 2 agendas in hand because I didn't think my opponent would run it. And since I forced out the SFC used by my opponent for running the Jackson, I'm able to score the ABT, but I choose not to. I want the secure Jackson in the remote so that I can score the ABT and then fire it. I feel like I need to fire ABTs this game. Something I didn't really talk about is that Smoke is actually a very good, or rather, HB is actually a very good matchup for Smoke. Conversely, I'm going to struggle a lot with Smoke because firstly, they're a Shaper, which means they run Clot, disrupting my Biotic plans. Secondly, with Smoke's Breaker Suite, she can easily just slice through my servers like a hot knife through butter, and it's no joke. Like, the Lotus Field keeps out most other runners with ease, but it just completely falls to Refractor for just 2 credits. That's definitely not good. And my opponent plays a Clot here, very annoying. right after accessing archives. Very smart, so that they don't get the virus purge because there's a CVS in the bin. Now, given that I have 2 friends in hand, I think it makes perfect sense for me to try to get a CVS on the table and then attempt to score the ABT next turn. The question is, where do I put the CVS? Now, I'm looking at my opponent's board. They don't have a clone chip, so I do not have to worry about actually defending the CVS. All I need to do is to get it somewhere on the table, and then, you know, they'll either be forced to run it, which auto purges, or I can just res it and purge the next turn when I score my ABT. So I'm definitely going to friends here for CVS and something. I'm just deciding where to put the CVS. I chose not to put it in the Jackson server because I want the Jackson Howard to stay alive. If I put it in the Jackson server, there's a good chance my opponent will attempt to run it. So I'm going to put the CVS in the Breaker Bay Grid server instead. This will give me a discount for resing and then using it. So my opponent runs HQ here. This is a very smart choice because they know that given the way I'm playing, it means that I must have agendas and biotic in hand. Otherwise, why would I be so intent on getting a CVS naked out? A naked CVS out, rather. So if my opponent was astute, he would, or she would have ran on, sorry, it's a he. He would have ran HQ multiple times, but instead they decided to go for the control route instead, playing like a control shaper, which is not the worst idea, except that my opponent's quite poor, and then goes for HQ again. Very smart. Very unfortunately for my opponent, they were playing correctly there, but they missed the agenda. So as a result, I get to score this. With no clone chip, my ABT goes uncontested. I mill 2 agendas and a Fairchild 3 into server 4. That ice goes, no question. So this immediately converts my remote into a scoring remote. As long as my opponent's poor, they will have a very hard time contesting this remote. I'm going to shuffle agendas here, and then I realized because the ABT dumped 2 agendas in the bin, I wasn't expecting that. I had another 2 in there already, so I was forced to actually concede 1 to my opponent. Whoops. Well, yeah, that shouldn't have happened, but, well, it is what it is. We'll continue on our way. And my opponent runs HQ. Oh dear, they are really finding agendas here. Do they hit the ABT? No, thankfully not. Ooh, that could have been really bad if I let my opponent get to match point. So I immediately think of getting my ABT into the server. It looks very secure right now. My opponent doesn't seem rich enough. I'm going to advance it. There should be no way my opponent gets through the server. And I install Naked Adonis while I'm at it. Just to continue fueling my econ. Every turn that a campaign spends my hand is a turn that I'm not using it to gain money. Your econ assets are your resources, and you really should be milking them to their fullest. So yeah, I chose not to rest the Adonis there because it would be too easy to trash. But yeah, I was hoping to wait for some sort of like a Breaker Bay Grid or something. Anyway, I scored the ABT there because I knew that if I milled any agendas with the ABT, I would be able to use friends to retrieve them back. I did not find any agendas. However, I'm going to bait my opponent into running this remote to make them think it's an agenda by putting the Jackson in there. This Jackson was milled by the ABT, so hopefully I can bait a run on this server, since my opponent seems rich enough to be able to contest it. I also installed Breaker Bay Grid onto the Adonis server, so this allows me to res it for cheap. And yet, unfortunately, my opponent doesn't bite, so I still do get an ABT out of it. And at this point, being at 4 points, I decide, well, my opponent has stolen a domestic sleepers. It looks like my best line of play here is to actually hyper draw for the Marcus Betty in my deck. There are 2 of them. My deck is running out very, very quickly, but I need to find a Marcus Betty. That way I can score a global food and then conveniently win. That is my win condition, and I'm going to go for it. My opponent hits my HQ, misses again. They're very, very unlucky on these HQ hits. I need to find a Marcus Betty because at this point, my opponent is able to easily siege my remote. They have more than enough ghost credits between Smoke, Ghost Runner, and Netrunner. So I hyper draw, finally find Betty, so I get to put it in the remote. Unfortunately, it's at this point I realize that I'm in a lot of trouble. I have 3 agendas in my archives. I have 2 in my hand, and my deck only has, 6 cards left. This is a lot of trouble. I'm forced to pitch a lot of my cards, and because I knew that there would be so many agendas left in deck, and my opponent knew that as well, they went for the indexing. So I was like, okay, at least I only put 2 agendas in there, but unfortunately it seems like they're probably going to be able to see at least 2 agendas out of 5. Let's do an agenda count. There are 9 proper agendas in this deck, 4 in the score areas, domestic doesn't count, 2 in my hand, 1 in the bin, so 2 in R&D. Yep, there are exactly 2 in R&D. So whether my opponent actually finds the agendas in R&D or not, it doesn't really matter. Because they can just attack any other server and they would likely find an agenda. Archives has an agenda for them to win. HQ has 2 out of 5 for them to win, and he must have seen at least one agenda on R&D because there are 2 in 6. Yeah, this is really bad. So I could only sit here and wait as I watch myself bleed to death. So I basically lost this game because I couldn't find a Marcus Batty. Both Marcus Batties were stuck in the bottom 8 cards of my deck. That was super unlucky. That being said, one could argue that I actually misplayed the game. During the turns in which I was busy clicking Jackson to find my Marcus Batty, maybe I should have just accepted what I had and played with the cards I had instead of trying to find cards that might not come. So a good alternative would actually have been to just jam ABTs and Vitruviuses in the remote. Make my opponent get them. Yeah, it's super taxing. The remote is still super taxing. For someone who doesn't have the entire stealth rig set up, I could have pressured my opponent's stealth credits. Notice that they were on Refractor instead of Houdini. The stealth expenditure would have been significant, and I'm not sure if my opponent would have found that remote to be palatable to run at all. I was stuck in a tunnel vision, one that said, you need to get 7 points exactly. Go find a way to score the food, even if it means digging for the Batties in your deck. Instead, I should have looked at the remote from my opponent's point of view and told myself, hey look, you played 2 ABTs, you fired 2 ABTs, there are now 5 or 6 eyes on the remote. That is so unpalatable for the runner to run through. It's so easy to just jam agendas in there. It's not like my opponent's on match point. That was my downfall. In all likelihood, my opponent would have just went for indexings instead, and if I had not drawn that much with Jackson, my R&D would be less porous, less agenda dense. So that was a very big mistake from me, and I really shouldn't tunnel vision. I should look from my opponent's point of view, where they don't know what the ice is, they don't know what agendas or what biotics I have in my hand. They can't run the remote because there's too many unadvanceable cards that are non-agendas that could just trip him up and lose in the game. I should have thought of that. This is a very big flaw of my co-op play that I'm not really able to grasp very well, even though I've been playing this game for a long time. So yeah, hopefully you can learn from my mistakes, because it seems like I certainly am not. Before I go, I just want to make a quick announcement because I am busy with real life commitments next week. Video production might be irregular or even non-existent for the next 7 days. I will try my best to get videos up, but I hope you understand. In the meantime, thanks for watching and happy net running. Goodbye.